the far reaches of the Milky Way galaxy, it's Retro Nerd Girl with a film review for you. Today I'll be reviewing the movie The Dark Crystal, released in 1982. The synopsis is, on planet Thra, a young gelfling embarks on a quest to heal the planet's crystal and vanquish evil. The story. This is one of the magical movies brought to us by American puppeteer, animator, cartoonist, actor, inventor, and filmmaker Jim Henson. His love for puppetry began in high school, and he went on to create shows while he was a student at University of Maryland, where he met his wife Jane. In 1958, he co-founded Muppets, Inc. with his wife. When he moved to New York City in 1963, he hired puppet performer Frank Oz to replace his wife at the company while she raised their children. His relationship with Frank grew as the two collaborated on character development and comedic content featuring his puppets. The Children's Television Workshop was impressed by Jim's work and requested him at the children's educational television program Sesame Street in 1969, and many of his Muppet characters thrived to the point that they are still incredibly popular to this day. Jim pitched a weekly show to serve a more mature audience, The Muppet Show, and landed 5 seasons from 1976 to 1981 at ATV Elstree Studios in England. He then changed Muppets Inc. to Henson's Associates Inc. Around the same time frame in 1976, Jim saw Brian Froud's art in a book of British illustrators called Once Upon a Time and was instantly interested in collaborating with Froud. He loved the idea of Brian's creatures being vastly different from his puppets, but he could also imagine them in puppet form. His idea was a callback to the dark tone of the Brothers Grimm fairy tales. In 1978, they made an official deal to work together on a film. Jim gave Brian a few notes about what he wanted through conversation, and Brian came up with some concept drawings before there was even a finished script. However, there was a fundamental misunderstanding of what Jim wanted. Froud thought that Jim said he wanted to call the movie Dark Crystal, but he actually said The Dark Crystallis. It was an unusual title that is actually referring to the oppressed fantasy world where all of this was to take place. Luckily, Henson was so impressed with what he saw that he decided to include the crystal into the storyline. Thenceforth, the title became The Dark Crystal. On February 6, 1978, Jim Henson and his daughter Cherry were stuck at an airport hotel during a snowstorm, where they came up with story ideas on stacks of hotel notepaper. Only a few days later, they had a typed outline available. The rest of the year was spent nurturing the creatures for the story, to see what actions the puppets could and could not perform. In mid-1979, the screenplay for The Dark Crystal was finally completed by David Odell and Jim Henson. Because of the success of the Muppet movie in that year, it helped Jim's pitch to Paramount Pictures, and the rest is history. What we got was a sweet, magical tale detailing the last 2 survivors of a species trying to save their world from oppression and suffering in an exciting adventure and a race against time. The lore is so vastly deep, it needed a narrator in the beginning who just barely scraped the surface of the story. The film is also brilliantly told visually, showing us a beautiful alien world filled with unique alien creatures, not one human being in sight. Now the pacing. At 1 hour and 33 minutes, this film is short, but it feels bigger and longer than what it is. It may be a little unevenly paced for some, but I personally enjoyed it, and in fact, I wanted more. The challenge. The challenge in the story is clearly stated in the posters and the trailer featuring bird-like looking creatures, or more specifically buzzard-looking like creatures called Skeksis. However, that only scratches the surface of who they really are and their motivations that were revealed in the film and the franchise. So that's why I got a little nerdy with the research to fill in all of these details for you. Okay, so the story started on a planet born of crystal, far beyond the furthest star, from the furthest reaches of the universe, with an ancient race called the Urskeks. They were tall, glowing, and possessed psychic abilities that made their society more of a collective. There was a small group of 18 Urskeks known as the Fallen that were unhappy with their society and yearned to start the Age of Harmony by dividing their light and dark selves, which was considered heresy in their society. The Fallen were banished from their home world to a similar world, also created from crystals called Thra, by the way through the Great Crystal, during the planet's first Great Conjunction of 3 suns. They were only allowed to return home when they proved that they could master their darker sides. At first, they tried to reform themselves when they arrived by helping the indigenous creatures, and sought to return home during the Second Great Conjunction. They weren't quite masters of darkness within yet, so the crystal was cracked, which led the Urskeks to split into 2 separate beings, the Skeksis and the Uru. The Skeksis were greedy, selfish, mean-spirited, and for all accounts, evil, oppressive, violent, destroyed many parts of the landscape, and downright disrespectful and genocidal to the indigenous. The Uru were extremely kind, gentle, spiritual, in touch with nature, preferred pacifism, but did nothing to help the planet of Thra against the Skeksis. One deterrent that prevented the Urus and the Skeksis from fighting each other was that if one was wounded or died, the other counterpart befell the same fate, because they were only halves of a whole. Oh, I love that concept. It's so fascinating and a cool addition to the story. After the split, one of the biggest supporters to the Skeksis were the Gelflings, a society of small human-like creatures. After the Skeksis' many atrocities and manipulation, the Gelfling turned against their overlords when it was discovered that the Skeksis began harvesting Gelflings to steal their life essence, which would temporarily preserve a youthful appearance and vitality. The Gelflings went to war and won, and found the missing shard from the crystal. The Skeksis were desperate and created the Gartham soldiers that looked like black giant sea crabs. The Gartham were not organic creatures and were nearly indestructible. They turned the tables on the war against the Gelfling. The Gelfling sought an answer to win the war and used the ceremonial flames of prophecy and etched the solution on the wall of destiny. It says that only a Gelfling could heal the dark crystal with the shard, which would unite the Skeksis and the Uru back together again at the next great conjunction. The prophecy states, "When single shines the triple sun, what was sundered and undone shall be whole, and the two made one, by Gelfling hand or else by none." The one thing that the Skeksis wanted to avoid like the plague was to be reunited with the Urus. They deployed the Gartham to wipe out every living Gelfling. The selfish temporary joy of extracting Gelfling essence was not even worth the risk of being reunited with the Urus. That tells you a lot about the Skeksis and their priorities right there. The story starts at a place where the next conjunction is almost at hand, with only 10 Skeksis and Uru left alive. Upon finding out that there are 2 living Gelflings still alive, they go all out to try to capture or kill them. What I love about this film is how they portray the Skeksis in the beginning of the film, showing that they are the elite on the planet within their ranks. They all have a tier system, and it's pretty interesting to see that each one of the Skeksis all have different meaningful responsibilities within their inner sanctum. The Skeksis' Emperor Skekso dies, and so does the Uru counterpart Urso. Skekso was so selfish to the last moment that he never named a successor. However, the Chamberlain, Skeksil, was Chief Secretary of State and technically was in line to become Emperor of the Skeksis. However, he was challenged by the powerful Gartham Master, Skeks-Ung, and lost the epic trial by stone for power. Other interesting Skeksis are Skek-Sok, the Ritual Master, Skeks-Tek, the Scientist, Skek-Ayek, the Gourmand, Skek-Ekt, the Ornamentalist, Skek-Na, the Slave Master, Skek-Shad, the Treasurer, and Skek-Ok, also known as the Scroll Keeper. The Skeksis are the challenge as a group, but Chamberlain stands out as a character because, as a result of losing the contest of strength to determine the next ruler, he's banished and stripped of his garbs. In order to re-establish his rank, he has to do something to prove himself to the new emperor. He spends some time just snooping around as the spies of the skies, the crystal bats, have spotted a Gelfling, and bingo, this is his chance to get his position back, and becomes one of the most dangerous of all of the Skeksis, fully motivated to capture the Gelflings. Chamberlain also has a way of making strange noises that are even annoying to the other Skeksis. It's a whimpering sound that sounds like he's constantly scheming all the time. It sounds like It's a very unique character trait, and it makes his character so much fun to see on screen. Even though he's a bad guy, there's a lightheartedness to him, to the point that when I first saw this movie, my mom and I would just make those noises and say, "Skeksis want peace, yes! Skeksis want peace!" And it displays his dedication to use any means of deception to get what he wants. In a way, I think his methods are truly scary because he comes at you as trying to make peace, but he's really trying to entrap you into his web. Now, during the Gelfling's interaction with Chamberlain at the Wall of Prophecy, it's quite possible that the Skeksis have a powerful ability to persuade other species, and that's why they've been able to take advantage of this planet. While Chamberlain is talking to the Gelflings that he stalks, they are captivated by his words, almost as if in a trance or falling into a trance. And that kind of power gives the Skeksis an incredible advantage over their victims. So this makes them a formidable challenge. I was very afraid that the protagonists were not going to make it. I love this challenge. Now, the empathy. The empathy in this film for me begins with Jen, a young Gelfling being raised by the leader of the Urus, Master Ursu, who is dying, just as the Emperor of the Skeksis is dying. David Odell said that Jen was Henson's way of projecting himself into the film. At this point of the story, Jen believes he is the last of the Gelflings, and he learns that he has to leave the protection of his camp, bearing the grief of losing his father figure, and fulfill the prophecy he never knew existed. He is told that he has to find the shard and heal the Great Crystal. This is the hero's journey, because Jen doesn't want to leave the Urus or to take on the prophecy at all. He goes into the adventure mainly because Master Ursu tells him to, but he grows to understand throughout his journey that he has to save his world from the injustice of the Skeksis. At first he meets Agra, who is a fascinating character that even the Skeksis have a bit of respect for. Not a lot, but some. I could dedicate an entire hour talking about her character alone, but I will try to condense her story in a few words for you if I can. Agra is Thra personified, born from the crystal, speaking on behalf of the planet and all of the creatures therein. Originally, her name was Habitat, but it simplified her too much, or it was too on the nose. When she was born, she brought balance to the world, naming all of the creatures of Thra, and nurtured the Gelfling race into a society. When she began to obsess about the stars, she predicted the first great conjunction that brought the Urskeks to Thra, who at first came bearing knowledge, and even built her an observatory charting the movements of the universe. After the mishap of the second great conjunction, she lost much of her memory, but regained it over time. Aughra kept the shard of the crystal that was broken and hid it in her observatory while the Gartham War nearly wiped out all of the Gelflings. Up until the point that she meets Jen, she believes that they are all dead, and you can see that she is visibly surprised to see Jen. Her personality is probably the most impressionable, being that she is nearly as old as the planet itself. She is feisty, yet wise, giving one the feeling of watching a female Yoda, perhaps. It's a strange mix, but she never fails to put a smile on my face. Although she's a serious character, there's something endearing about her. Next, Jen meets Kira with her super cute pet, Fizzgig. She is also a Gelfling. Some posters give it away that there are more than one Gelfling in the story, but this is such a surprise to all of the characters, and I love that thread throughout the film. When they touch, we see and hear the narration for a short background story for both characters at once, which is pretty cleverly done. It is a power that they have called dream fasting. What a cool ability, though you might not want to do this unless you have control over what you dream fast. But Kira is such a special character to me because she stole my heart when I first saw her on screen. This adorable girl was raised by the Podlings and has such a kind, sweet, caring demeanor. She can communicate with the animals and looks after Jen as soon as they connect, even when he's not even aware of it. She's so wonderful to him, and I think that's part of what works for me, because they're both the very last of their kind. They need to stick together. This is a certain kind of connection that they have to each other that they probably have never felt ever in their lives with any other beings. After Kira's village is attacked by Garthams looking for Jen, he wants to give up and throws the shard away. He blames the shard for the destruction of Aughra's observatory and the destruction of the Podling village, not the Skeksis, who are truly responsible for the violence. Again, the hero is refusing the adventure. Jen stumbles across the ruins of the Gelfling Wall of Destiny, where he fully learns and understands his destiny. In a moment of surprise, Chamberlain tempts Jen into a trap, but Kira has a sense about these things and helps Jen to snap out of his trance. This is when Jen realizes that he must take the next steps towards the journey, but maybe there's a little doubt that he can actually do it. Even though Kira is skilled in the wild, having been raised there, and even having wings that allow her to float, the character is not impervious to danger. She gets captured and needs help more than once, to the point that she even dies, at least temporarily, in the story. It's a wonderfully written character that supports the main character, but Kira being in danger prompts Jen to silence his doubts and summon the courage that he needs to try to stop the Skeksis from harming her. There's a kind of love story brewing between the two, and it is so very sweet. We love a good little love story. Now, the story is told very well, allowing Jen to reach his arc by stepping into his destiny, working in tandem with Kira as a team. It's so wonderful, and this is why I adore these characters so much, and I just love the story. Now, the technical aspects. Jim Henson and his companies were very busy in 1979 working on the 4th season of The Muppet Show, releasing the Muppet movie, working on The Great Muppet Caper that was eventually released in 1981. There's a lot going on. And The Dark Crystal technically went into production in 1979 as well. One of the first things Jim did was put together the Jim Henson's Creature Shop in partnership with Brian Froud in Hampstead, London, to work on the movie. It wasn't until 1981 that the first scenes of the film were shot, such as the gorgeous Mystic Valley, the dramatic death of the Skeksis Emperor, and the mysterious foreboding Crystal Chamber. The film has so many gorgeous locations used in the film for exterior shots, such as the Scottish Highlands and England. Jim Henson and Frank Oz co-directed the film with Brian Froud, acting as the conceptual designer for the film, creating the creatures, interiors, landscapes, and even the font of the opening title. Before designing any of the characters, they concentrated on the look of the world of Thra and based it on the area where Brian Froud lived. They took meticulous care making sure to design every rock, plant, creature that may appear on the planet. This was why the world of Thra is a wonderful cacophony of imaginative exuberance that really sells the fact that this is an alien environment that transported audiences right into the fantasy. Each scene and establishing shot is filled with a kaleidoscope of gorgeous alien nature. The main highlight of this film is definitely the fantastic creatures that were created for the story and the fact that there were no humans in the film at all. All of the characters were played by puppets in this remarkable alien world. This was an incredible feat for its day, and at the time, 2D and stop motion animation were probably the best way to make a serious movie without human beings. So in many ways, this movie was quite groundbreaking. It was rumored that approximately 9 tons of rubber was used to create all of the creatures in the world of the Dark Crystal. Brian's creature concept designs were dispersed among puppet designers who helped develop them and how the puppeteer would operate them. It is so fascinating to know that most of the main characters like the Gelflings, the Skeksis, the Uru, and Augur were operated by a standing or crouching puppeteer moving their bodies, moving their head with their right hand, and operated the left hand of the puppet. They were followed by several crouching or sitting technicians that operated the right arm of the puppet and facial expression animatronics. All of the while, all of the puppeteers and technicians were able to see what they were doing on a monitor. The Gelflings were most human-like of all of the creatures of Thra, and the most difficult to create. Puppet designer Wendy Midner worked on designs for years, going through several iterations before getting the thumbs up from Brian and Jim for the characters. Brian and Wendy Midner fell in love and eventually married in 1980 during the time that they were working on the film together. The struggles with the Gelflings were not over. It was difficult to perform their movements because they had to be as human-like as possible. They were mostly filmed from the waist up, and if they were walking, a performer had to walk on their knees or take tiny steps to make it look convincing. Mike Edmund, Deep Roy, Jack Purvis, Malcolm Dixon, and a few others were body doubles for these scenes, showing Gelflings in full frame. The Uru were designed with geometric symbolism in mind to connect them to the Skeksis, simultaneously modeling them after a wise-looking troll that Brian drew in his book, The Land of Froud, published in 1977. Henson really liked the troll, but Froud had to change the design slightly to create the Urus with some distinction away from the troll to keep the license separate. So he designed them to have 4 visible arms. The Urus were performed with the puppeteers walking in a crouched position, operating the left arm for one of the creature's 4 arms, and the right arm was used to hold up and manipulate the heavy head of the creature. While watching them on screen, you have to admire the muscle control they had and the direction of the coordination movements of these very slow-moving characters. What an incredible job! Their garbs were also very much a representation of their peaceful nature, with more browns, more naturalistic fibers, and details. One could imagine a complete story based on their tiny camp. The details of their dwelling space was so immersive. The Skeksis were initially designed to look like crocodiles living in a castle, quote unquote. To me, they look like vultures. Like the Uru, the Skeksis also have 4 arms. A second set was hidden beneath their ornate robes. When Aughra was in the early stages of development and still called habitat, she was male and looked like an ogre. Then the name changed to Oghra, then Aughra, and then they decided to make the character female to appeal to that audience base. Aughra was wonderfully sculpted by Lyle Conway, based on Stygian witches from Greek mythology. In the movie Clash of the Titans 1981, the witches use an external eye to see, much like Aughra does with her own eye. Her excessive wrinkles actually helped her to have more flexibility and mobility than the average puppet did. She was puppeteered by Frank Oz, while technicians operating her facial expression animatronics crouched while following him around. Frank Oz also read her lines before her voice was dubbed into the final cut of the film, with the incredible voice talents of Billy Whitelaw. Full body shots were also played by body double actors. The Gartham's large costumes were inspired from crustaceans with claws and had an impenetrable outer shell. They were very difficult for performers to get in and out of. Not only that, they were extremely heavy. The suits had to be hung on racks with the performers still in them during breaks. They also needed to take breaks every 5 minutes to rest because they were so burdensome. I thought that the design was intimidating, yet staying within the aesthetic framework of the film. The podlings were the next human-like creatures to the gelflings, and I love the spirit of their culture, drenched in the arts, music, socializing, and just fun. I think that it's hilarious that Froud was inspired by potatoes when designing them. Their puppetry was simple because many of them had fixed facial expressions, with the puppeteer operating them like the standard puppet, using a monitor to see how the puppet appeared on screen. A few of them had more animatronics applied, such as the podling that had its essence drained. Those fluffy balls that rolled across the floor like vermin, and the live food that the Skeksis eat were wind-up bots. It's a low-tech detail that adds so much oomph to the scene, livening it up with realism. You can actually imagine these things and the sounds and the smells that may have infested the castle. The sound was a huge feature in this film to also bring that realism to life. The sound was wonderfully immersive as it was all put into post-production. The composer here is Trevor Jones, who became a part of the project late in 1980 before shooting started. At first, he considered making the score using unconventional methods to seem more alien. However, the orchestral score was decided on, and he recorded the score with the London Symphony Orchestra in January of 1982. It was wonderful, giving us a magnificently mystical theme that also had soaring moments of grandeur and mystery. The Landstrider theme in particular was composed in honor of Trevor's newly born daughter at the time. My enjoyment. The film ends dramatically with the Gelflings and the Skeksis in the crystal chamber facing off with one another. Unfortunately, Kira gives her life to save Jen. Jen heals the dark crystal as the Uru walk in the room, lining up to their Skeksis counterpart, and the two made one. What was sundered is undone, and the castle and the land around it transforms magically. The reconstituted Urskeks bring Kira back to life. The Gartham disintegrate, the podlings regain their essence, and then the Urskeks return to their home world. It was a wonderful, happy ending, and it really felt like the story was complete. After a series of troubled test screenings, Jim worked feverishly on changes for the Dark Crystal to simplify the plot. He trimmed about 20 minutes from the movie and redubbed specific dialogue, and that seemed to improve the film, according to many people who were able to see the early screenings of the modified film. Then the movie was released in December 1982. It performed well at the box office, coming in at the 16th highest grossed movie in North America, but it was an even bigger hit on VHS video cassettes. My mom took me and my brother, who was about pretty much a baby at that time, to this theater. And we absolutely loved this movie. We had so much fun watching this movie and enjoying the wonderful world that Jim Henson created with Brian Froud's designs. Just gorgeous fantasy world that we just loved. We loved that movie together. And over the many years, the cult following for this property exploded. And there have been many novels and comics that explored the story further over the years. All this time, I had no idea there was more to the story than what was shown in the film. And it's all extremely fascinating to me. In 2019, Netflix produced a prequel series, The Dark Crystal: Age of Resistance, set several hundred years before the original film, which Brian and Wendy's son, Toby Froud, went on to work on as a designer 37 years later. Unfortunately, it had a low viewership and was canceled after the first season. In conclusion, I love this kind of epic fantasy storytelling and the tactile creation of its alien world. Oh, it's wonderful and full of mystery, detail, and just gorgeous beauty. It's insanely creative, dealing with heavy drama, but also keeping the energy light and whimsical. There is that whimsical feel to it that I absolutely love. That is a very delicate balance to achieve. This is a fantasy epic classic. My rating is a 9.8. Well, that sums up my review, everybody. I hoped you liked it. And if you did, I've got over 100 of these videos, so go on and browse the channel to see more reviews from me like this. I also have live shows that you can also watch or set on your schedule so you can be a part of the conversation. Subscribe if you haven't done so already, and hit the bell icon to be the very first to be notified of my next video. This is Retro Nerd Girl signing off. Take care, movie lovers. I'm off to my next review.